Two people, same starting line. Lynn and Ethan started at the same company on the very same day. Both 27 years old, earning a matching salary of $60,000 and sitting at adjacent desks. Everything was the same. Until a sudden jump over a decade later reveals two completely different realities. One of them is steering a yacht in open waters. The other is still stuck in the endless gridlock of a morning rush hour. Looking at them, you can't help but ask the ultimate question: what on earth happened in between? The ink on the contract was still fresh. Two signatures, identical terms, zero deviation. They shared the same coffee machine, the same hallway gossip, and the same monthly performance metrics. Outwardly, they were carbon copies of the modern corporate cogs. Yet, the subtle gears inside their heads were already turning differently. The city swallowed them whole. To anyone looking, they were just another statistic in the global workforce. When the first paycheck cleared, the numbers matched down to the exact cent. 60,000 split evenly across the year. They talked about their dreams over cheap coffee, both believing that time was an endless resource. But time has a quiet way of exposing the smallest deviations. Day in and day out, the routine repeated, punch in, punch out. From a macro perspective, their trajectories looked identical. They walked the same paths, breathed the same air. Yet the invisible infrastructure of their lives was beginning to diverge. A fraction of a millimeter at the start becomes miles apart at the finish line. Remember when it all began. The optimism, the shared baseline, the illusion that everyone has an equal shot. The system doesn't care about your potential. It only measures your output. Time moves forward for everyone at the exact same speed, but wealth doesn't. This is where the divergence truly takes root, not in grand gestures but in quiet choices. Let's wind the clock forward and see where these identical paths led them. The first paycheck lands, $5,000 cleanly deposited into the account. To a 27-year-old starting out, it feels like the keys to the kingdom. Lynn's immediate reaction: celebration. Months of ramen noodles and unpaid internships demanded compensation, time to reward the hard work. Meanwhile, Ethan sits at his modest desk, looking at the exact same numbers with a completely different lens. The first decision is made. One chooses instant gratification, the other chooses future optionality. We survived the probation period. Lynn toasts to the night, feeling rich, free, and completely justified in spending. Ethan spends his evening differently. Not on a night out, but on an online seminar, investing in a skill that pays dividends forever. On paper, their net worth tonight is identical, zero. Both started with a clean slate. The difference tonight is invisible. To the naked eye, they are still running the exact same race. But compound interest is a silent beast. It doesn't care about your intentions. It cares strictly about your actions. Every city is built on millions of small decisions made on payday. Most choose comfort. A few choose leverage. The seed is planted. It looks like a pebble dropped into an ocean, making barely a splash. But in the laws of wealth, the smallest initial deviation dictates the ultimate destination. The first paycheck isn't a reward for past suffering. It's the very first vote you cast for your future self. One bought temporary status, the other bought permanent freedom. The gap tonight was microscopic. You could fit it on the edge of a pin. But in the theater of time, microscopic cracks become canyons. The sun rose again on another ordinary workday. To them, life felt stable and full of promise. They had no idea that this single choice on payday was the rudder that would steer their entire lives. It wasn't about the amount of money. It was about the direction the money was pointed. Fast forward a few years. The illusion of similarity begins to crack under the weight of real life. Years blur together. Both Lynn and Ethan are working harder than ever, trapped in the relentless machinery of their careers. Lynn clings to a dangerous mantra. If I just work a little harder, the promotion will change everything. Ethan takes a radically different route. Instead of just grinding harder at his day job, he carves out time to build new skills. Their hours begin to flow into completely different reservoirs. One trades time for a salary, the other invests time into assets. Lynn is always busy. Emails, meetings, fires to put out. The calendar is a battlefield with no breathing room. Ethan is also busy, but not trapped. His extra hours are planting seeds that will eventually grow independently of his physical presence. Whispers of restructuring echo through the halls. When the corporate winds shift, the illusion of safety shatters. Lynn's entire livelihood is anchored to a single point of failure, the company's payroll. Ethan hears the same rumors, but his pulse doesn't race. He has built a life raft before the storm even formed. This is the hidden trap of the modern worker, confusing activity with progress and busyness with security. No matter how hard Lynn works, the financial water level never rises. Expenses scale up in exact proportion to the paycheck. Ethan's secondary systems are beginning to breathe on their own. The extra effort is finally turning into autonomous momentum. The illusion of the rat race, running faster on a treadmill that leads absolutely nowhere. We are taught how to sell our time efficiently, but never taught how to buy our freedom back. The gap is no longer just financial. It is energetic, mental, and structural. They still look like they are in the same game, but the rules of their respective games have completely changed. Until the day the storm finally breaks. The illusion of the safe 9 to 5 job shatters in a single afternoon. Hard work is a multiplier, but if multiplied by 0 or tied entirely to a single fragile source, it leads straight to exhaustion. Let's see what happens when the first real crisis hits. This is where the true test begins. The economic cycle turns. A sudden wave of layoffs and market contractions hits the industry like a tidal wave. Lynn is caught in the crossfire. With 0 emergency savings and a salary that vanished overnight, panic sets in immediately. Ethan is also impacted by the downturn, but his pulse doesn't race. He faces the storm with quiet composure. The illusion of the safe job is shattered. The true difference is no longer about the paycheck, it's about resilience. Lynn realizes a terrifying truth. Stopping the active job meant stopping all oxygen to survival. Ethan's diversified streams of income act as a shock absorber. The market drops, but his foundation holds firm. When your income depends on a single thread, any pair of scissors in the world can cut your life in half. The crisis forces a painful awakening. Lynn finally understands that safety was never a job title. While others panic, the prepared capitalize. A crisis isn't just a threat, it's a massive realignment of wealth. The great filter of the economy separates those who sell time from those who build systems. The pain of discipline is far less than the pain of regret. Lynn's mindset begins its slow, painful shift. Ethan's safety net didn't happen by accident. It was built brick by brick during the quiet, boring times. A crisis doesn't change who you are. It simply reveals what you've built. Most people think wealth is about how much you make. This crisis teaches the brutal truth. It's about how much you keep and protect. Lynn survives the first major shock, but the cost has been enormous. Years of time lost just to get back to zero. When you are at zero, every emergency is a catastrophe. When you have assets, an emergency is merely an inconvenience. The first decade closes. The small, invisible choices of the past are about to compound into an unbridgeable canyon. Let's fast forward to the decade mark, where the magic and the tragedy of compound interest truly reveals itself. The crisis was the test, not of their intelligence but of their architecture. Next, the snowball begins to roll. Prepare to see what happens when time multiples the choices you make. 10 years have passed. The invisible choices made on a quiet payday have finally manifested. Lynn's salary finally increased. He hit his targets, earned the promotion, and felt a surge of validation. But with higher income came an immediate upgrade in lifestyle, rent, and monthly commitments. Expenses scaled right alongside earnings. The faster he made money, the faster it slipped through his fingers. Ethan, meanwhile, experienced a completely different kind of growth. His capital began to generate its own momentum. Every investment made in the past began to compound, turning passive seeds into an active financial engine. Time no longer treated them equally. For one, time was a master demanding more sweat. For the other, an ally printing freedom. 10 years of trading raw time for money takes a toll, compounding health pressures and hidden vulnerabilities. Ethan's wealth bought him energy, peace of mind, and the luxury of self-care. When industry turbulence struck again, Lynn felt the tremor deep in his bones. His income was his only shield. Ethan remained unbothered. His multi-stream ecosystem absorbed the shockwaves effortlessly. His social circle became a mirror of consumption, competing to look rich rather than actually becoming free. Ethan's network shifted toward creators, thinkers, and builders, multiplying his intellectual and financial capital. Every night brought the same quiet panic. The treadmill never stopped, and neither could he. While the other found peace in knowing that time and money were finally working for him. The snowball effect is silent, relentless, and completely indifferent to intentions. This is the ultimate law of compounding. The systems you set in motion dictate the reality you inhabit. What started as a microscopic gap on payday has now become an unbridgeable chasm. The choice was never about how hard they worked. It was always about the vehicle they chose to ride. Choose your direction wisely before time chooses it for you. A typical day reveals the true depth of the divide. Two lives, built on the exact same foundation, now running in parallel universes. Lynn's day is entirely spoken for by meetings, deadlines, and mandatory firefighting. Every hour is traded for survival. Ethan's calendar is clear of mandatory servitude. His mornings belong to choice, presence, and long-term creation. Hours slip away in a blur of forced productivity, with every task measured by how much output can be squeezed from the clock. Ethan invests his afternoons into learning, expanding his perspective, and refining the systems that feed his freedom. Back on Earth, Lynn calculates every grocery bill, feeling the constant friction of an income that never quite stretches far enough. Ethan travels, explores, and continuously invests in new knowledge, turning capital into living experiences. As evening descends, the race against deadlines accelerates, consuming the hours that should belong to rest. Evenings bring choice rather than obligation, time to walk, connect, and decompress without an agenda. Late nights tell the true story. One rides home exhausted from chasing tomorrow's bills. The other rests easy, knowing his financial ecosystem works while he sleeps. The cost of living paycheck to paycheck is paid in sleep, peace of mind, and chronic underlying stress. True wealth buys deep recovery, allowing the mind to wake up sharp, clear, and ready for whatever is next. Day after day, the rhythm hardens into destiny. Small daily routines cement themselves into permanent realities. It is no longer about a single choice, but the entire architectural design of their days. One sells hours to buy things, the other buys assets to reclaim hours. The distance between them was never measured in miles, but in how each hour was spent. When your days are locked in a loop of survival, your future is already written. The paths have completely diverged. Same starting line, same salary, completely different destinations. The difference was never their salary. It was what they built with the hours left over. The truth is, they never possessed different salaries, different degrees, or superior intellect. Success was never a gift of birthright or a stroke of blind luck handed down from above. What truly changed their lives were the invisible, quiet choices made every single day. Consumption versus investment, entertainment versus learning. Choosing where every dollar flows on an ordinary afternoon determines where your life stands a decade later. Spending hours seeking immediate distraction versus dedicating hours to mastering timeless skills. Trading time for a paycheck versus building systems that generate wealth. No single decision was ever loud enough, cinematic enough, or dramatic enough to feel monumental in the moment. But thousands of microscopic repetitions, stacked invisibly over time, carved two entirely different realities. The architecture of your life is built entirely by the bricks you lay when no one is watching. Wealth is not about the numbers in a bank account. It is about the ultimate freedom to own your calendar. Time treats everyone with the exact same neutrality. It is how you partner with time that changes everything. You either design a system that works for you, or you remain a cog in a system designed for someone else. It all boils down to the very first choice made on the very first day. The compounding effect is the most powerful force in the universe, for better or for worse. 20 years have vanished. The wheel of time has turned, bringing them back to the exact same room where it all began. Lynn walks through the ballroom, carrying the heavy, invisible baggage of a lifetime spent trading time for bills. Ethan arrives with the effortless grace of a man who no longer depends on a paycheck, but on an empire of assets. Across a crowded room, two parallel lines that started at the exact same desk finally intersect once more. Side by side, the contrast is stark. Two bodies aged by time but shaped by entirely different destinies. Polite smiles hide decades of divergent choices. One is still planning for next month, the other is planning for the next century. They remember the first day, the identical desks, the identical paychecks, the identical dreams whispered over morning coffee. Everything was identical back then. The starting line was a mirror image. Yet the divergence was total. One built a prison of active labor, The other built a palace of passive freedom. As the room toasts to 2 decades of corporate success, the true celebration is happening in the quiet margins of private choices. The evening ends, and they part ways once more, one heading back to the relentless treadmill, the other to a horizon of boundless choices. Looking back across 20 years, the ultimate truth becomes blindingly clear. The difference was never their salary. It was what they did after payday. Every pay period is a blank canvas, a quiet fork in the road where your future self is quietly being built. So ask yourself when the next notification arrives, which path will you choose? If today was your very first payday, which choice would you make? Choose your direction wisely before time chooses it for you.